All right, welcome to Chapter 9. So, Chapter 9 is on statistics. Statistics is the branch of mathematics that deals mainly with collection and summarization of data. So, we're looking at analyzing data and making inferences based on our analysis. So before we get started on frequency distribution, just a couple of terms that will also pop up that you'll hear. So the first one's when we talk about a random sample. So when we want to make an inference or we want to learn something about a characteristic of a population, we want to be able to make that inference about the whole population without getting the information based on the whole population. That's very, very difficult to do. So what we could do there is instead we can collect the information from a limited sample of the population and be able to draw inferences based on that sample. The best way to going about doing that is by doing a random sample. So we like to use a random sample because we like to give each member of the population an equally likely chance of being selected, and they are representative of the sample. So that would be the best way to go about doing it. So with that said, we're going to look at frequency distributions. So when we talk about frequency, we're talking about a count. How many times does it occur throughout the sample? So when you usually create frequency distributions, the basic one for frequency distributions is making a tally table. So when you make a tally table, essentially you are making what's called a grouped frequency distribution. So in a group frequency distribution, it's a table that has 3 columns. One column represents what you're sampling, the second column includes a tally, and the third column includes the frequency, the number of times from the tallies. So, for example, we surveyed a group of 30 business executives, and we asked them, how many college credits did you take in business classes when you were in college? So these 30 business executives from our sample gave us the number of credit hours they took. So I'm including that list here. So if you need to pause the video and copy this down, that's fine. 9, 15, 14. Now again, with sampling, many ways this could be done. This could be done through surveys. This could be done by making telephone calls. This could be done in person. But again, you want to try to make it as random as possible. We want to try to avoid bias. Bias is bad when looking at random sampling. Okay, so here's our list. So the first thing I would do is I would look for the max and the min. So in this sample, our minimum or min ends up being 0. Our max ends up being 34, I believe it is. Okay. So we want to go from 0 to 34. So the best way to do this is to take the data and group into intervals. When grouping into intervals, you want to be thinking about what would be the best groups that would only go from 0 to 34. So in this case, I'm going to group my data into intervals of 5. You want to make them convenient size. You don't want to make them too small. You don't want to make them too large. So when you group into intervals, the rule of thumb basically is you want to have between 6 and 15 groups of intervals. So when I make my table, we have our college credits. So when I group the intervals, we always start with the minimum. So I was going to do 5 by 5. So we have 0 to 4. We have 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 29, and 30 to 34. And notice that my intervals started with our minimum and ended with our maximum. Okay. So now, with that said, we can create a tally based on that information. So if I go through and I count all my zeros to 4, we have 1, 2, 3. So my tally is 3. And then depending on how you make the table, you may want to go ahead and do your frequency here in this step, or you may wait. Do all your tallies first, then do your frequency. All right, so for my 5 to 9s, we have 1, 2, 3, and I'm missing 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. For 10 to 14, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 15 to 19, that's the largest group at 8. 20 to 24 would have 5 after the count. 25 to 29 would have 3, and then 30 to 34 would have 1. So we have 3, 4, 5, 8, 5, 3, 1. And when everything is said and done, the total should match the number that's in your random sample. So 3 plus 4, 7 plus 5 is 12, plus 8 is 20. No, we're missing one. Here, on the 10 to 14, that should be a 6, not a 5. Miscounted. Okay, so now that adds up to 30. All right, so that's how we can create that information for the group frequency distribution. Now, what can I do with this? Well, I could take this information and I can use it to create a histogram. So the next step they may ask you to do here is they may ask you to create a histogram. So remember, a histogram is where we look at creating intervals of data and use the counts, the bars here. So normally we would do 0 to 4 and go from there, but in this case we're going to approach it a little differently. Here, to create a histogram, I'm going to find the midpoint between two intervals, and I'm going to use it. So when I create my histogram, we have our x-axis and we have our y-axis. The y-axis is going to represent our frequency. The x-axis is going to represent the number of, oops, it would help if you could see that, the number of college credits. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Now, like I said in the past, normally we would go by 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14. But in this case, this histogram is a little different. In this histogram, we're going to create what's called a frequency polygon. So the frequency polygon is a graph that illustrates the grouped frequency distribution. If I go 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, the problem is the polygon will not be able to be formed because the bars will be a little different. So instead, what we do here is we look at finding the midpoint between two intervals. So notice that these two intervals go between 0 and 9. So if I do 9 divided by 2, that's 4.5. So what that means is that every 4.5, or every 5, so we start with 4.5. Then because our intervals are every 5 units, I'm just going to add 5 to this until I get to 34. So 9.5, 14.5, 19.5, 24.5, 29.5, and 34.5. And then we can even go to 39.5. Okay. So now what I can do is I can go through and now use my frequencies. So at 4.5, we go up to 3. At 9.5, we go up to 4. At 14.5, here we go up to 6. 19.5 was 8. For 24.5, it would be 5. 29.5 would be 3. And then 34.5 would be 1, and then 0. Now, once I create the histogram, then I'm going to go to the midpoint of each of the bars. I'm going to place my point and put the number there that represents that. So 3, 4, 6, 8, 5, 3, and 1. And then over here, I'm going to have a 0. And then I'm going to do 0 down here too, but I'm not going to mark it with a number. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch a line segment connecting each of those points. So a frequency polygon would look something like this. So this would help give us an idea of taking our grouped frequency distribution and graphing it. Okay, so these are the types of frequency distributions that you'll see. In the next video, we're going to be looking at group frequency distributions, and you will be asked to find the mean, the median, and the mode of these group frequency distributions. And then in the future, in the next section, in 9.2, we'll be looking at variation, where you'll be asked to find the range and the standard deviation based on this. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or Google Hangout me. We can always set up a Google Meet if you need additional help, and we will go from there. So in the next section, make sure that you watch the next video, and then the videos on the next section. We'll talk to you later. Have a great day.